Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Jefferson's Salute to the Presidents. This show should be an epic one as it features the life of my favorite president, Thomas Jefferson. That's right, my bobblehead will be saluting himself. So sit back, grab a bowl of ice cream as Jefferson introduced the dessert to America, and enjoy the show. Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13th, 1743, on his father's plantation known as Shadwell, which was located along the northern banks of the Rivanna River several miles east of Charlottesville. When the future president was born on this site, his father, Peter Jefferson, owned 60 enslaved people. Little is known about Jefferson's childhood on the grounds of Shadwell, except that he enjoyed books and loved to tromp through the woods to observe nature. From my position on top of the granite monument which marked Jefferson's birth site, I saw a small, dilapidated brick structure nearby. Could that have been one of Shadwell's outbuildings? During my first adventure to the Shadwell site on May 11, 2019, I was placed on the hallowed plantation grounds where I envisioned young Jefferson searching for wildlife. On that day, I had no idea there was a birth site monument only a short distance behind me. Can you see the gray granite marker sticking up above the weeds? When Jefferson was about 3 years old, he left Shadwell on horseback with a slave for the 50-mile trip to Tuckahoe Plantation. The slave put a pillow beneath the young boy to absorb some of the shock of riding horseback. Built in 1712, Tuckahoe Plantation was originally owned by William Randolph III and was the boyhood home to Thomas Jefferson from 1745 to 1752. When William Randolph died in 1745, Peter Jefferson moved his family, including Thomas, from Shadwell to Tuckahoe to care for the Randolph's three orphan children. From the side, it was easy to see how large the H-shaped house was. One of the Randolph children living here when the Jeffersons moved in was Thomas Mann Randolph, who was 2 years older than Thomas Jefferson. The two became in-laws when Randolph's son, Thomas Jr., married Jefferson's daughter, Martha, on February 23, 1790. Thomas Jefferson lived in this home from age 3 until he was 9 years old. Let's walk through the door behind me and see where young TJ grew up. I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to pose for photos in the front parlor of Tuckahoe. Whoops. Once again, my photographer was scolded by a tour guide. This is the living room where young Jefferson likely romped with his sisters and the Randolph children when they weren't outside. While I stood in the living room, I wondered if young Thomas Jefferson ever sat by that fireplace to read a book. Pulls alongside the original main staircase that led to the second floor bedrooms at Tuckahoe. I envisioned the Jefferson and Randolph children as they slid down the banister. I'm in an upstairs bedroom, one believed to have been used by young Thomas Jefferson during his stay in the house. This small, one-room schoolhouse was located roughly 50 yards east of the main house. This schoolhouse was at Tuckahoe when the Jeffersons lived there and was where Thomas received some of his first formal education. Let's go through the doorway behind me and see the school where Jefferson learned to read, write, and cipher. Thomas Jefferson learned to read and write inside this one-room schoolhouse, and for me, it was incredible to be there. Standing on the same floorboards that Thomas Jefferson once stood on as a youth when he attended school at Tuckahoe. How awesome is that? This schoolboy book of Virgil's poetry, which was signed by Thomas Jefferson and his friend Dabney Carr, was on display at the Monticello Visitor Center. Named after Sir Walter Raleigh, the Raleigh Tavern gained fame as a secret meeting place of the Burgesses after their actions did not suit the crown and they were dissolved. The Apollo Room inside was a frequent rendezvous point for Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and other patriots. As an 18-year-old, Jefferson had his heart broken in this tavern when he proposed marriage to Rebecca Burwell, and she turned him down. Capitol Building in Williamsburg was the site of Patrick Henry's speech on May 29, 1765, against the Stamp Act. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, George Wythe, and others played parts in legislative maneuvers that led to the Revolution. Second Capitol building was built in 1753 and played a huge part in America's Revolution. It remained Virginia's capital until it moved to Richmond in 1780. The building on this site was last used as a capitol on December 24, 1779. In 1832, the capitol was destroyed by fire, leaving no trace of the original structure. This two-story brick home behind me was the Williamsburg residence of George Wythe, a lawyer, scholar, judge, and signer of the Declaration of Independence. During my visit to Williamsburg on July 18, 2020, I wore a face covering due to the heightened COVID threat throughout our land. During Jefferson's time at William and Mary College, the future president was taken under Wythe's wing as an apprentice to learn the law. Jefferson once described Wythe as my faithful and beloved mentor in youth and my most affectionate friend through life, and my ancient master, my earliest and best friend. A widow, Martha Wales Skelton was only 23 years old when she married 28-year-old Thomas Jefferson on January 1st, 1772. Taimie is the geological formation located in Rockbridge County, Virginia, now known as Natural Bridge. Thomas Jefferson purchased 157 acres of land from King George III on July 5, 1774, that included the Natural Bridge. When Jefferson purchased this land, he called it the most sublime of nature's works. Thomas Jefferson built a two-room cabin near the formation, and as president, he surveyed the area. Jefferson also hosted guests here, including James Monroe and Martin Van Buren. I visited the Natural Bridge twice. The first time came on May 10, 2019. When I returned 2 years later on May 16, 2021, it rained during my entire visit. This is the view I had looking straight up from beneath the arch of the bridge. The arch is 215 feet high with a span of 90 feet across. June 11, 1776, Thomas Jefferson rented two second-story rooms in this house from Jacob Graff, Jr., which stood at Market and North 7th Street in Philadelphia. When Thomas Jefferson lived in one of the rented rooms above me, he wrote the Declaration of Independence in only 17 days. Thomas Jefferson was only 33 years old when he penned one of the most famous documents in world history. Thomas Jefferson used this portable desk in June 1776 to write the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. This historic lap desk was on display at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. I was thrilled to pose in front of wax figures representing the Committee of Five, who edited and finalized Jefferson's rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. The members from left to right are Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and Thomas Jefferson. Built in 1753 in Philadelphia and originally called the Pennsylvania State House, Independence Hall was where the Declaration of Independence was debated, adopted, and signed in July 1776. When the Committee of Five made the final additions and deletions to Jefferson's rough draft, they arrived at the State House on June 28, 1776, where they presented the document to Congress. I wondered how many times Thomas Jefferson stood in the same spot as he conversed with some of his fellow delegates. Committee of Five as they presented the Declaration of Independence to John Hancock. Following the vigorous debates in Congress's Assembly Room from June 28 through July 3rd, congressional delegates finally came to agreement on the Declaration on July 4th, 1776. Even though he authored the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson sat with his fellow Southern colleagues on this side of the Assembly Room. During my visit on June 12, 2023, it was as though I could see Thomas Jefferson as he walked up to this table to pen his name onto the Declaration of Independence. This is the original Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson signed the document on August 2nd, 1776, and he did it right about here. August 2nd, 1776, Thomas Jefferson dipped his quill pen into this inkstand and signed the Declaration of Independence. It was an honor for me to stand close to one of the most historically significant artifacts in the world, the original Sing inkstand from Independence Hall. 2 months after my visit to Independence Hall, I got a close look at Jefferson's signature on a rare, authentic copy of the Declaration that was engraved on July 4th, 1823. When Thomas Jefferson was elected as the second governor of Virginia and took office on June 1st, 1779, he moved into the governor's palace in Williamsburg. Patrick Henry was the first governor of Virginia and lived in the palace for 3 years before Jefferson was elected. During Jefferson's second year in office, he urged the capital be moved to Richmond to be safer from British attack. On December 22nd, 1781, after the capital was moved to Richmond, the governor's palace was destroyed by fire. This reconstructed building opened in 1934 on the original site. I'm standing in front of Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, which he shared with his wife Martha. In May 1782, Martha gave birth to their seventh child, Lucy Elizabeth II. The 16-pound baby caused issues for the 33-year-old wife of the future president. Completely bedridden following the childbirth, Martha's health steadily declined, and she died in the downstairs bedroom on September 6, 1782. In Martha's final days, Jefferson promised his wife he would never remarry, and he never did. Following Martha's interment in the Monticello burial ground behind me, Jefferson was inconsolable in his loss. After the funeral, he refused to leave his room for 3 weeks. Then he spent endless hours riding horseback alone around Monticello. Not until mid-October 1782 did Jefferson begin to resume a normal life. Martha's tombstone is at the base of the obelisk in the distance. Jefferson himself wrote the inscription upon the marker. Torn from him by death, September 6, 1782, this monument of his love is inscribed. This natural rock formation along the Appalachian Trail in Harper's Ferry consisted of several masses of Harper shale piled one upon another that overlooked the Shenandoah River just prior to the confluence of the Potomac River. Now known as Jefferson's Rock, this site became famous when Thomas Jefferson stood here on October 25th, 1783, and admired the view. Jefferson was amazed by the natural beauty of the area and wrote in his journal, "It is as placid and delightful as it is wild and tremendous. This scene is worth a voyage across the Atlantic." This was the view Jefferson had from the rock which now bears his name. I'm standing in front of the Miller Clater House, which was made famous in 1791 by founding father Thomas Jefferson. As it turned out, Mr. Jefferson developed an appetite for tomatoes in the late 1790s while visiting France as Secretary of State. He loved tomatoes so much, he sent seeds back to his home, Monticello, where they were first grown in our country. Following Jefferson's return to the United States, Americans were skeptical of the vegetable because they believed it to be poisonous due to its relationship with the toxic nightshade plant family. In 1791, while he was in Lynchburg, Thomas Jefferson shocked the locals by eating a tomato in public in front of the Miller-Clater house. Townsfolk couldn't believe one of America's founding fathers, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, was performing a death-defying act. That's right, Thomas Jefferson became the first person to eat a poisonous tomato in public in the United States. And he did it in the shadow of the building behind me, the Miller-Clater house in Lynchburg. Tavern at Chimney Point, located in Vermont on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain, was built around 1785 on the grounds of a 1731 French fort that once occupied this site. 6 years after the tavern was built, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson and Congressman James Madison stayed here on May 31st, 1791, during their tour of upstate New York and New England. Jefferson and Madison were accompanied on their trip by slaves James Hemings and Matthew. During their stay, Madison wrote, "On Crown Point is one family only. On the opposite side, country is well inhabited." After defeating John Adams in the 1800 presidential election, 73 electoral votes to 65, Thomas Jefferson was inaugurated in the old Senate chamber inside the United States Capitol on March 4th, 1801. Jefferson's inauguration was the first held in Washington and the first time the Marine Band played at the ceremony. The old Supreme Court chamber, where I had the honor of visiting on May 18, 2022, was the original Senate chamber where Thomas Jefferson took the oath of office on March 4th, 1801. Due to the verbal attacks during the campaign, along with his death of his son Charles from alcoholism, outgoing President John Adams did not attend Jefferson's inauguration. As I stood just outside of the old Senate chamber, I thought about the presidents who did not attend their successor's inauguration. Those men were John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Martin Van Buren, Andrew Johnson, and Donald Trump. When Jefferson moved into the president's house, he believed each state should have more power to govern themselves rather than from the federal government. In 1803, President Jefferson doubled the size of the nation when he made the Louisiana Purchase. He paid France $15 million for the land that now comprises all or parts of 15 states. In 1804, Jefferson sent his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, along with William Clark, on an expedition to the West Coast dubbed the Corps of Discovery. While serving as president, Jefferson used the green room in the president's house as his dining room. Hostess Martha Jefferson Randolph. During Jefferson's presidency, only one state was admitted to the Union. That was Ohio, which officially became a state on March 1st, 1803, which brought the total number of states to 17. Now located near the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Pier was originally constructed in 1804 when President Jefferson requested a survey of a new meridian through the president's house. The 3-foot tall granite monolith I'm standing on was positioned directly in line with the center of the President's house to the north and the center of the newly constructed United States Capitol to the east. Since 1943, the Jefferson Memorial stood directly south of the Jefferson Pier as well. Although President Jefferson won re-election in 1804 over Federalist Party candidate Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, 162 electoral votes to 14, some controversy was created during the campaign when Jefferson was accused of having children with Sally Hemings, one of his slaves. Another controversial decision was made when Aaron Burr was left off the 1804 ticket because of Jefferson's growing lack of trust in him and Burr's perceived lack of loyalty. During Jefferson's second term, Burr became a bigger Burr in his riding boots when the former vice president attempted to create his own country in the western part of the Appalachians. Not only did Aaron Burr make it unscathed through the trial for murdering Alexander Hamilton in 1804, he was also acquitted for treason in 1807. President Jefferson, who resembled Grandpa Munster in the photo, used this desk behind me in the president's house while in office. Soon after Thomas Jefferson left the president's house for the last time on March 4, 1809, he wrote to a friend saying, "I know well that no man will ever bring out of that office the reputation which carries him into it." Construction on Jefferson's retreat house, Poplar Forest, began in 1806 while he was still president. The octagonal design of Poplar Forest may have been the first of its kind built in the United States. Jefferson first began annual visits to the home in 1810 to orchestrate the construction. When his retreat house was completed in 1816, the visits lasted from a few days to weeks. John Wales, who became Jefferson's father-in-law, purchased the property in 1764 and added 819 acres in the next 6 years. Wales was also the first to use slave labor on these grounds. When Wales died in 1773, a year after Jefferson married his daughter Martha Wales Skelton, the couple inherited the full 4,810 acres of land where the home behind me now stands. Jefferson once said of Poplar Forest, "The best dwelling house in the state, except that of Monticello." Jefferson frequently brought his granddaughters Ellen and Cornelia Jefferson Randolph to the house after 1816, and always traveled to Poplar Forest with a small specialized group of enslaved men and women who were based at Monticello. Let's take a walk through the front door of Poplar Forest and see where Thomas Jefferson spent a lot of time from 1810 to 1823. The room I'm standing in once served as Jefferson's bedchamber at Poplar Forest. This bedroom, like most rooms in Poplar Forest when I visited on May 10, 2019, were in the process of being renovated. The central dining room was where Jefferson and his guests would have enjoyed dinner. The room was brightened by a skylight. The 8 walls of this room was very evident of Jefferson's architectural design. The view I had out of this window offered me a look at the 1814 wing of offices. I'm standing on original brickwork and near the only fireplace that was at Poplar Forest when Jefferson lived there. I was awestruck knowing that Thomas Jefferson once placed his hand on this wall and started a fire in that very fireplace. As I stood in the unfinished dwelling, I had an opportunity to pose alongside an original walnut door that was crafted by John Hemmings, one of Jefferson's enslaved workers. I thought the semicircular window offered a cool view of the outdoors and the top of the wing of offices. Even an author of the Declaration of Independence had to use the bathroom. As I held my breath, I wondered if Jefferson ever used this privy. Near the end of his life, Jefferson sought to find permanent residence for the property. The president's grandson, Francis W. Epps, and his wife Mary Elizabeth moved to Poplar Forest shortly after their 1823 marriage. Thomas Jefferson's last visit to his beloved retreat home came that same year. In January 1815, Congress paid Jefferson $23,950 for 6,487 books to replace the ones the British destroyed in 1814. Those books formed the nucleus of the current Library of Congress. That money could have helped Jefferson get out of debt, but instead he purchased more books and stated, "I cannot live without books." Unfortunately, there was a second fire in the Library of Congress in 1851 that destroyed nearly two-thirds of Jefferson's original books. This bust of Thomas Jefferson resides in the Library of Congress and commemorates the contributions of the Sage of Monticello. The University of Virginia was founded in 1819 by Thomas Jefferson. The original governing board of visitors included Jefferson, James Madison, and sitting president James Monroe. It was awe-inspiring for me to stand on the lawn with the rotunda behind me, as both were designed by Thomas Jefferson for the University of Virginia. It's easy to see Jefferson's architectural eye in the university's rotunda design, even though he never saw it completed before his death in 1826. The former third president considered the founding of the University of Virginia as one of his three greatest accomplishments during his lifetime. In the past few years, due to the country's woke movement, this statue dedicated to Thomas Jefferson has been at the center of some controversy. Thomas Jefferson began designing and building Monticello, which is Italian for Little Mountain, in 1768. After Shadwell burned down in 1770, Jefferson moved to the south pavilion of his unfinished plantation house. He lived at Monticello primarily for the rest of his life. Monticello was completed in 1809 with the addition of the distinctive dome above the west portico. The west portico of Monticello was called the nickel side, as it was depicted on the back of a U.S. 5-cent coin. The mansion I'm standing near was the second Monticello on the site. Jefferson rebuilt the house from design ideas he acquired in Europe, and construction continued throughout his presidency. This two-story South Pavilion building was where Thomas Jefferson and his new bride Martha lived while construction at Monticello was ongoing. The small building was given the nickname the Honeymoon Cottage. From my position on the South Pavilion, it was easy to see the west portico of Monticello in the background. Jefferson stocked this fish pond with fish caught in the nearby Ravenna River, where they were kept alive until needed for dinner. View from this pond was stunning, even though pollen and pond scum had dulled the reflection during my visit on May 17th, 2021. This is the east entrance to Monticello and was where visitors walked into the entrance hall to meet the president after arriving by carriage or horseback. From my position on the east portico, I could see the well-groomed semi-oval lawn, which was marked by a decorative post and chain fence in the distance. Let's walk through the east entrance door behind me and visit the world of Thomas Jefferson. Once inside entrance hall, visitors were treated to Jefferson's collection from the Native American culture, likely sent to Monticello by Lewis and Clark. The artifacts displayed on the opposite side of entrance hall depicted Jefferson's philosophy that knowledge is power, knowledge is safety, and knowledge is happiness. This room, called the South Square Room, was primarily used as a sitting room for Jefferson's daughter Martha. I'm standing on the fireplace mantel below Gilbert Stuart's Edge Hill portrait of Jefferson. Jefferson used his library for science and study. He also designed the University of Virginia in this room. He described the college as a hobby of my old age. These were Jefferson's drafting instruments, which he used to make drawings of Monticello, Poplar Forest, and the University of Virginia. Jefferson called this room the cabinet, which was his modern office where he answered letters, recorded the weather, and managed his plantation. Jefferson kept this marble bust in his cabinet as well. Can you guess who it's supposed to represent? Yes, it's George Washington with curly hair. I'm standing next to Thomas Jefferson's eyeglasses and fountain pen. Were these used by Jefferson when he wrote letters to and read letters from John Adams? Thomas Jefferson's alcove bed was accessible from the cabinet. The two small lead dumbbells on the table alongside the polygraph were used by Jefferson to exercise his wrist after he broke one in a fall. I'm standing on the original floorboards of the cabinet with Jefferson's bed in the background. I love standing in the footsteps of the presidents, and there's none better than Thomas Jefferson. From the cabinet side of Jefferson's alcove bed, I was so close that I touched the bedpost in front of me. I would have given anything to have stood on Thomas Jefferson's bed, but my photographer's arm needed to be 3 feet longer. The bedchamber was the most private space of an intensely private man. Jefferson's regimen of rising in the morning and retiring in the evening all took place in this room filled with his most personal possessions, away from visitors and most family. Thomas Jefferson made the bookcase that stood in his bedchamber. His personal riding boots he wore while making his daily horseback rides around the plantation were positioned in front of a chair. Here's a closer look at Jefferson's personal riding boots. From a position on the fireplace mantel in Jefferson's bedchamber, it was as though the sage of Monticello was there with me. Parlor inside Monticello was the center of social life as the room hosted weddings, dances, and other important events. Jefferson also used his parlor for games, music, and general conversation. Not only was Jefferson a talented violin player, but he also loved to play a good game of chess as well. Hanging above the mirror in the parlor were portraits of what Jefferson said was my trinity of the three greatest men the world has ever produced. They were from left, Sir Francis Bacon, Sir Isaac Newton, and nearly out of the image, John Locke. When I arrived in the dining room, I stood on the small tilt-top tripod table that was fashioned out of mahogany by John Hemmings. I couldn't believe I was standing on this table where Thomas Jefferson once ate his meals. I love self-guided tours. I'm now standing in the tea room, which Jefferson once called his most honorable suite. It was the coldest room in the house, and Jefferson liked to display likenesses of his friends and Revolutionary heroes here. Situated on the wall to my left were the busts of George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette. In this view in the tea room, which was also used for overflow seating during meals, the busts of John Paul Jones and Benjamin Franklin can be seen on the wall. Now let's go up the extremely narrow staircase and visit the dome room, which is only accessible to VIP visitors, like me. I'm standing in the upper level dome room at Monticello. Jefferson referred to it as the Sky Room, and it's believed his grandchildren and nieces played here. When a door inside the dome room was opened, it revealed a hidden area where Jefferson's nieces played. The only known long-term residents of the dome room were Jefferson's grandson Thomas Jefferson Randolph and his bride Jane. I visited Jefferson's beer and wine cellar, which was located beneath the house. I nearly caught a buzz from being there. When British soldiers arrived at Monticello to capture Jefferson on June 4, 1781, the author of the Declaration of Independence was nowhere to be found. But the soldiers did find Jefferson's wine cellar, and boy, did they have a field day in here. Copper cookware could be seen in the Monticello kitchen, which is where half Virginian, half French cuisine was prepared by the enslaved cooks. The last room I visited at Monticello was located below Jefferson's bedchamber. The small, dark room with no windows was believed to be where Sally Hemings had lived. Sally, one of the enslaved people at Monticello, was three-quarters Caucasian and was the half-sister of Jefferson's wife, Martha. There's good evidence Jefferson fathered 6 children with Hemings, 4 of whom lived to adulthood. Historical likeness of Sally Hemings. On July 2nd, 1826, suffering from rheumatism and in a large prostrate, Thomas Jefferson lay agonizing in his alcove bed behind me. Throughout the next day, the president was in and out of consciousness, waking at 7 p.m. long enough to ask his doctor, "Is it the 4th yet?" When the doctor replied, "It soon will be," Jefferson fell back asleep and never woke again. Those proved to be his final words. Thomas Jefferson died at the age of 83 in his bedchamber, in this bed, at 12:50 p.m. on Tuesday, July 4th, 1826. It was the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson may never have known that his friend, John Adams, lay in his own deathbed and would die just over 5 hours later. It was an honor for me to visit the mansion behind me and to stand on the grounds of Monticello where Thomas Jefferson once walked, rode, and pondered life. Following his death on July 4th, 1826, Jefferson was placed in a wooden coffin made by John Hemmings and carried to the nearby burial ground where a simple private funeral was held the following day. On July 5th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson was laid to rest alongside his wife Martha and near his best friend Dabney Carr, who passed away in 1773. Thanks to the tall iron fence with the sharp spikes at the top, I was never able to stand on Jefferson's tombstone. The Monticello graveyard is governed by the Monticello Association, and only direct descendants of Thomas and Martha Jefferson are allowed to be buried there, with a few exceptions. Sally Hemings and her descendants are not allowed interment in the Monticello graveyard. Jefferson designed his own tombstone, and the inscription on it, "Of the three accomplishments listed, President of the United States was not one of them." The monument behind me was not Jefferson's original grave marker. Due to the desecration from souvenir hunters, the original obelisk was replaced with this one in 1883. In this view of the Monticello Cemetery, Jane Randolph Jefferson's grave was located next to my left hand in the image. Jane was our third president's mother. Jane Randolph Jefferson died of a stroke on March 31st, 1776, just 3 months before her son wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence. While Thomas Jefferson wrote more than any other president in history, he rarely mentioned his mother in any of his writings. I found this statue just a few yards from Jefferson's original tombstone on the campus of the University of Missouri. This obelisk I'm posing on marked Thomas Jefferson's grave at Monticello for 50 years, from 1833 to 1883, and now sits on the campus of the University of Missouri. The reason this obelisk was replaced was because souvenir hunters had chipped away pieces of the granite marker. Who in the world would ever chip away pieces of a presidential grave marker? Dedicated by FDR on April 13th, 1943, with a statue of Jefferson added 4 years later, the Thomas Jefferson Memorial honors the third President of the United States. An hour or two after I had visited the Oval Office on May 17, 2019, I paid a night visit to the Jefferson Memorial. The 19-foot tall bronze statue of Jefferson weighs 10,000 pounds, and it sure made me look like a cheap bobblehead made in China. During my May 21st, 2021 visit, I had the honor of standing on the statue, which was something I never thought I'd get to do. This experience was all thanks to the efforts of Bob Moldenhauer, who placed me between Jefferson's feet. The interior walls of the memorial featured some of Thomas Jefferson's greatest written words, including an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence that can be seen behind me. I posed on this bronze statue of Thomas Jefferson during my visit to the Capitol's Rotunda on May 18, 2022. This symbol of American freedom, Mount Rushmore, was created by sculptor Gutzon Borglum and 400 workers from October 4th, 1927 to October 31st, 1941. When I was carried along the presidential trail to the base of Mount Rushmore, this was as close to the sculpture as I could get without being arrested. The sculpted likeness of Thomas Jefferson was dedicated by President Franklin Roosevelt on August 30th, 1936. Jefferson was chosen by Borglum because of our nation's growth during his presidency. We hope you've enjoyed our show about the life of Thomas Jefferson. Were you able to finish your ice cream? Please do us a huge favor and subscribe to our channel and hit the like button below. And also feel free to leave us a comment. Our next show will focus on the life of James Madison. We hope to see you there, and thank you for watching.